The full moon hung like a silver coin against the star-scattered sky, casting its ethereal glow over the sacred grove where the bonding ceremony was about to begin. For 21 years, Island had dreamed of this moment. As an Omega werewolf of House Crescent, he had lived quietly in the shadow of his pack, waiting for the night when fated mates would finally bond for eternity. The great bonfire crackled in the center of the grove, its flames reaching toward the moon that would witness the most important moment of his life. Island's heart hammered against his ribs as he felt the familiar pull intensify. The invisible thread that connected fated mates had been growing stronger for months, drawing him inexorably toward one person, Kairos of the Northern Blood. Standing across the fire, Kairos was everything an alpha should be: tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that caught the firelight and eyes like winter storms. The pack looked to him for strength and leadership, and tonight, according to the ancient laws, he would be Island's. They had known each other since childhood. Island had always believed in their destiny, had felt the bond calling to him even before he understood what it meant. Now, surrounded by dozens of unmated wolves whose excitement and nervousness filled the air, there was only one heartbeat that mattered to him, the deep, resonant call that matched his own. The elder raised his staff and the gathered wolves fell silent. Tonight, under the blessing of the full moon, those called by fate will step forward and claim their eternal bonds. Let no one stand between what the moon goddess has decreed. Island took a step forward, then another, his bare feet silent on the soft earth. Around the circle, other wolves were moving too, drawn to their destined partners by forces older than memory. Kairos's eyes found his across the fire, and for a moment, Island saw something flicker there: recognition, desire, perhaps even tenderness. The silver thread of their bond became visible in the moonlight, stretching between them like spun starlight. He reached out his hand, his fingers trembling not with fear but with anticipation. This was it. This was the moment he had dreamed of since he first understood what it meant to have a fated mate. And then everything shattered. "I will not bind myself to this pathetic creature." Kairos's voice boomed across the grove, loud enough for every wolf present to hear. His words hit Island like physical blows, each one more devastating than the last. "An Omega with impure blood is not worthy to be my mate. Even his scent is disgusting. I would rather choose someone stronger, not a weak dog with dreams of love." The world seemed to slow as Island watched Kairos reach up and grasp the silver thread that connected them. His face was hard, emotionless, as if the tender moment they had shared just seconds before had never existed. With one sharp motion, he tore the bond apart and cast the broken pieces into the fire. The pain was indescribable. It felt like someone had reached into Island's chest and ripped out half his soul, leaving jagged edges that burned with every breath. Through the haze of agony, he could hear the shock and whispers of the gathered pack, their emotions crashing over him in waves. Some whispered among themselves, others stared openly at his humiliation. The other bonding pairs continued their ceremonies as if nothing had happened, but Island stood frozen in the center of it all, broken and bleeding inside. "Island." The elder's voice was gentle but carried disappointment underneath. "Return to your place. The moon goddess works in mysterious ways." Somehow he managed to move his feet, to step back from the fire and fade into the shadows at the edge of the grove. He watched as Kairos stood tall and proud, unmarked by what he had just done, while Island felt like he was dying from the inside out. The ceremony continued around him, but he was no longer part of it. He was nothing, a rejected Omega, a failed mate, an embarrassment to his pack. Chapter 2. Cast out into the cold. The days that followed were a blur of shame and isolation. Word of Island's rejection spread through the pack like wildfire, and everywhere he went, he felt the weight of their judgment. The pack council met in emergency session to discuss what to do with him. An Omega without a mate, especially one who had been publicly rejected, was seen as unstable, potentially dangerous. "You bring dishonor to House Crescent," his pack leader told him bluntly. "Your presence reminds everyone of weakness, of failure. Perhaps it would be better if you found somewhere else to live." They took away his family name first. He was no longer Island of House Crescent. He was just Island, unaffiliated, unwanted. Then they came for his dwelling, the small cabin on the outskirts of Pack territory that had been his sanctuary. He watched from a distance as they set it ablaze, the flames consuming everything he owned, every memory of the life he had built. The other Omegas who had once been his friends now crossed the street to avoid him. They feared that association with a rejected mate would bring them bad luck, would mark them as undesirable to potential alphas. The alphas were worse. Some mocked him openly while others looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust that made his skin crawl. "Maybe if you had been stronger," one of them said as he passed by the training grounds. "Maybe if you had fought for what you wanted instead of just standing there like a wounded deer." But what was he supposed to have done? Force Kairos to accept a bond he didn't want? Begged him to reconsider while the entire pack watched? The laws of fated mates were clear. Both parties had to willingly accept the bond. He couldn't make Kairos want him. After a week of this treatment, Island made the only choice he had left. In the dark hours before dawn, he gathered the few possessions they hadn't burned and slipped away from Pack territory. He headed for the northern ridge, a wild place where exiles and outcasts went when they had nowhere else to turn. The mountain wilderness was harsh and unforgiving. Snow covered the ground even in late autumn, and the thin air made every step a struggle. Island's healing magic, already weakened by the severed bond, began to fail him entirely. He managed to survive for 3 days on roots and stream water before the cold and exhaustion finally overcame him. He collapsed in a snowbank, his body too weak to continue. As consciousness faded, he thought about Kairos's words. Was he really so weak, so worthless, that even his fated mate couldn't bear the thought of being bound to him? Maybe it was better this way. Maybe the world would be better off without a failure like him. Chapter 3. Saved by Darkness. Island woke to warmth and the scent of burning wood. He was lying on soft furs in front of a fireplace, his frozen clothes replaced with a simple but clean tunic and trousers. For a moment he thought he might be dead, that this was some kind of afterlife. Then he heard footsteps and turned to see a figure approaching from the shadows. The man was tall and elegant, with pale skin that seemed to glow in the firelight and dark hair that fell in waves to his shoulders. His eyes were the color of blood rubies, and when he smiled, Island caught a glimpse of fangs. A vampire. In the mountains above Pack territory, he had stumbled into the domain of one of the old blood. "You're awake," the vampire said, his voice cultured and smooth. "I was beginning to wonder if I had wasted my time bringing you inside." "Who are you?" Island managed to ask, his voice hoarse from cold and disuse. "I am Lorimir," the vampire replied, settling into a chair across from him. "And you, little wolf, are trespassing on my territory, though I suspect you didn't choose to be here deliberately." Island tried to sit up, wincing as his muscles protested. "I can leave. I don't want to cause trouble. In your condition, you'd be dead within an hour." Lorimir studied him with those unsettling red eyes.
"Besides, I'm curious.
"What brings a pack wolf to my mountain, half frozen and alone? Wolves are social creatures. Where is your pack?" The question hit like a physical blow, bringing back all the pain and humiliation of his rejection. "I don't have a pack anymore," Island said quietly. "I was cast out." "Ah." Understanding flickered in Lorimir's expression. "A rejected mate, I'm guessing. The scent of a severed bond clings to you like smoke." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. How refreshingly tragic. Island flinched at the casual cruelty of the words, but there was something in Lorimir's tone that wasn't quite mockery. More like professional interest. "I collect interesting things," Lorimir continued. "Artifacts, knowledge, the occasional lost soul looking for purpose. You have an interesting quality about you, a stillness that speaks of inner strength rather than weakness. And there's something else." He tilted his head, studying Island more carefully. "You have magic, don't you? Healing magic." Island nodded reluctantly. His gift had always been subtle, easily overlooked, but he had been one of the pack's healers before his exile. "Rare and valuable," Lorimir mused. I could use someone with your abilities. I have need of an assistant, someone to help maintain my collection, to translate ancient texts, to provide. He paused, and for a moment his carefully controlled expression slipped. To provide companionship that doesn't bore me to death. What would be the terms of such an arrangement? Island asked, surprised by his own boldness. Food, shelter, protection from those who would hunt you. In exchange, you work for me. Nothing more complicated than that. Lorimier extended his hand, and Island noticed that his palm was marked with symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the light. Do we have an agreement? Island looked at the offered hand, then back at Lorimir's face. In those ruby eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen from anyone in weeks. Not pity, not disgust, not even mere tolerance, but actual respect for who he was and what he could offer. We have an agreement, he said, taking Lorimir's hand. Chapter 4. A New Kind of Home. The castle that Lorimir called home was nothing like what Island had expected. From the outside, it looked like a massive black spire that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, but inside it was warm and welcoming. Comfortable furniture filled rooms lined with books and artifacts from across the known world, and windows showed views of places that definitely weren't the surrounding mountains. Magic, Lorimir explained when he saw Island staring at a window that currently displayed what looked like a tropical beach. The castle exists in several places at once. Convenient for business, if somewhat disorienting for newcomers. Island's rooms were on the third floor, a bedroom, a small sitting area, and a workspace where he could carry out his duties. They were simple but comfortable, and after weeks of sleeping in caves and under trees, they felt like the height of luxury. What exactly will my work involve? Island asked as Lorimir showed him around. Translation, primarily. I have texts in dozens of languages, some of them so old they're barely remembered. Your healing gift should help you understand the emotional context behind the words, which is often more important than the literal meaning. Lorimir paused at a table covered with scrolls and books. There's also some organizing to be done, correspondence to maintain, and the occasional research project. And the companionship you mentioned? Lorimir glanced at him, and for a moment his carefully controlled expression slipped. I have lived for over 800 years, Island. Do you know how difficult it becomes to find conversation that doesn't bore you to tears after the first century? Most beings are so predictable, so limited in their thinking. But you, he studied Island's face. You might be different. The work was engaging in ways Island hadn't expected. The ancient texts were filled with wisdom and beauty, stories of love and loss and triumph that resonated across the centuries. His healing gift helped him understand not just the words but the emotions behind them. The hope of a long-dead poet, the despair of a conquered king, the joy of lovers reunited after years apart. Lorimir proved to be an excellent teacher, and as the weeks passed, an increasingly comfortable companion. He was brilliant and well-traveled, with stories that spanned continents and centuries. But more than that, he was kind in ways that were subtle but meaningful. He never mocked Island's ignorance when he encountered something unfamiliar, never made him feel lesser for being in exile. You don't seem like the vampires from the old stories? Island told him one evening as they worked together in the study, translating a particularly complex ritual text. What did the old stories say about vampires? Lorimir asked without looking up from his own work. That they were cruel and manipulative, that they delighted in corrupting the innocent and stealing souls. Some do, Lorimir said matter-of-factly. But then some wolves delight in cruelty as well. Some humans, some elves, some of every species I've encountered. Evil isn't determined by what you are, it's determined by what you choose to do. And what do you choose to do? Lorimir was quiet for a long moment. His pen paused over the parchment. I choose to preserve knowledge that would otherwise be lost. I choose to help those who seek answers to important questions. And I choose to surround myself with beings who make existence interesting rather than tedious. Is that what I do? Make existence interesting. Lorimir looked at him then, and Island saw something warm in those ruby eyes. Among other things, yes. Chapter 5, Growing Closer. As autumn turned to winter, their relationship deepened from professional to something more personal. They shared meals together, worked side by side in comfortable silence, and spent evenings by the fire discussing everything from ancient philosophy to the migration patterns of birds. Island found himself looking forward to Lorimer's company in ways that had nothing to do with employment. But it was during one of winter's worst storms that everything changed between them. Island had been feeling unwell for several days. Not sick exactly, but restless and uncomfortable in his own skin. His scent had been shifting too, becoming sweeter and more intense in ways that made him self-conscious. He tried to hide it, but Lorimer's enhanced senses made that impossible. "You're going into heat," Lorimer said bluntly one morning over breakfast. Island nearly choked on his tea. What? Heat. It happens to unmated omegas, though usually not as intensely as what you're experiencing." Lorimer studied his face with clinical interest. "When was your last cycle?" "I've never had one," Island admitted, embarrassed. "The pack healer said it was because of my bond with Kairos, that my body was waiting for our mating to trigger my first adult cycle." Ah! Understanding dawned in Lorimer's expression. "And now that the bond has been severed, your body is trying to complete its natural development." Inconvenient timing, given the storm. The storm he referenced was indeed severe wind howling around the castle with enough force to rattle the windows. Snow falling so heavily that the world outside had disappeared into white nothingness. Even if Island wanted to leave to avoid the awkwardness of going through heat near an unmated male, travel was impossible. "I can prepare a room on the top floor," Lorimer offered. "Far enough away that my presence won't exacerbate your condition. There are supplies there, foods that will help, herbs to ease the discomfort." "You would do that for me?" "Of course." Lorimer looked puzzled by the question. "Did you think I would throw you out into a blizzard?" The heat hit Island like a physical blow that afternoon. One moment he was organizing correspondence in his workspace. The next he was doubled over with waves of need that left him gasping. His skin felt like it was on fire, and every nerve ending seemed hypersensitive. The sweet, desperate scent of an omega in heat began to fill the air. Lorimer appeared in his doorway within minutes, his nostrils flaring as he caught the scent. For a moment, his carefully controlled expression slipped, and Island saw the predator beneath the civilized exterior. But then he mastered himself, his face becoming a mask of concern. "Come," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Let me help you to the upper room." The next 3 days were a blur of fever and need. Lorimer brought him food and water, herbs to ease the worst of the symptoms, cool cloths for his burning skin. He was professional and careful, never taking advantage of Island's vulnerable state, but Island could see the strain it put on him. Lorimer's own scent became more intense, responding to his despite his best efforts to remain unaffected. "Why aren't you claiming me?" Island asked him on the second night, his mind hazy with heat fever but still curious. "I'm unmated, in heat, and you're clearly affected. Most alphas would see this as an opportunity." "Because you're not in your right mind," Lorimer said simply, wringing out another cool cloth. "And because when you come to my bed, I want it to be your choice, not your biology making the decision for you. When, not if." Lorimer paused in his ministrations, meeting Island's eyes. "I have grown fond of you, Island, more fond than is probably wise. But I won't take advantage of your heat to get what I want." When the heat finally broke, Island felt different. Not just physically, but emotionally. The experience had been intense and overwhelming, but having Lorimer care for him through it had created a bond between them that went beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship. "Thank you," he told Lorimer as he finally emerged from the upper room, clean and dressed and feeling more like himself, "for taking care of me, for being honorable." "You don't need to thank me for basic decency," Lorimer said, but Island could see the relief in his expression at having him back. "How do you feel?" "Different. Stronger somehow. Like I've finally grown into who I was meant to be." Island studied Lorimer's face, noting the signs of strain and sleepless nights. "It was difficult for you too." "Yes," Lorimer admitted. but not unbearably so. I'm older than I look, Aileen. I have excellent self-control when I choose to exercise it. And if I asked you not to exercise it? If I told you that what I felt for you had nothing to do with heat and everything to do with the man you've shown yourself to be? Lorimer went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying that I care for you, that these months of working together, of getting to know you, have made me realize that what I had with Kairos was nothing compared to what I could have with you. Aileen stepped closer, close enough to see the way Lorimer's pupils dilated at his nearness. I'm saying that if you want me, I'm yours. The kiss Lorimer gave him was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he couldn't quite believe this was happening. But when Aileen responded eagerly, pressing closer and opening his mouth under his, Lorimer deepened it with a passion that made his knees weak. Are you certain? Lorimer asked against his lips. I'm not human, Aileen. I'm not even mortal. A relationship with me would be complicated. I'm an exiled Omega with healing magic, Aileen replied. I think I can handle complicated. Chapter 6. Love Found. What followed was the most beautiful night of Aileen's life. Lorimer made love to him with a patience and skill that left him speechless, worshipping his body like it was something precious rather than just using it for his own pleasure. Through his healing gift, Aileen could feel Lorimer's emotions as clearly as his own desire. Yes, but also tenderness, possessiveness, and something deeper that made his heart race. Mine, Lorimer whispered against his throat as he moved within him, his voice rough with feeling. My Omega, my heart, my choice. Yours? Aileen agreed, arching beneath him as pleasure built to impossible heights. Always yours. In the morning, he woke in Lorimer's arms feeling more complete than he ever had before. This wasn't the desperate pull of a fated bond, but something he had chosen freely, something that was his and Lorimer's alone.
No regrets.
Lorimer asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Aileen's bare skin. None, Aileen said, meaning it completely. Only that it took us so long to get here. Lorimer pressed a kiss to the top of his head. I love you, Aileen. I know it's soon to say it, but I've lived long enough to recognize the real thing when I find it. I love you too, Aileen whispered, and felt the truth of it resonate through every fiber of his being. Their relationship transformed from that point forward. They were still employer and employee during working hours, but in private they were lovers and partners. Lorimer showed him wonders he had never imagined, other realms accessible through the castle's magic, artifacts that held the power of ancient civilizations, knowledge that had been lost to the world for centuries. But more than that, he showed Aileen that he was worthy of love exactly as he was, not stronger, not different, not improved in any way, just him, with all his quietness and sensitivity and strange gifts. Chapter 7. An unexpected addition. It was during the spring that they encountered Issa. Aileen had been exploring the ruins of an old temple about an hour's walk from the castle when he heard crying. Following the sound, he found a small figure huddled in the shadow of a broken wall. A child, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with cuts on his arms and terror in his dark eyes. He was unlike any being Aileen had seen before. His skin had a translucent quality to it, as if he were made partially of shadow, and when he moved, wisps of darkness seemed to follow him. But his tears were real enough, and the pain radiating from him through Aileen's gift was heartbreaking. Hey there, Aileen said softly, crouching down to his level. Are you hurt? The child, for despite his strange appearance, that's what he was, looked up at him with eyes too old for his face. Are you going to hurt me too? He asked in a voice barely above a whisper. No, Aileen said firmly. I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Aileen. What's yours? Issa, he said after a moment of hesitation. I don't have a family name. I don't have a family at all. The story came out in fragments over the following hour. Issa was half-human, half-shadow creature, the result of a union between a human woman and a being from the plane of shadows. His mother had died when he was very young, and he had been passed from relative to relative, none of whom wanted to care for a child who reminded them daily of otherworldly influence. The last family said I was cursed, he explained, showing Island the fresh cuts on his arms. They said shadow children bring bad luck. They hurt me and told me to go away. Looking at this frightened, injured child, Island felt something fierce and protective awaken in his chest. Well, they were wrong, he said firmly. You're not cursed, and you don't bring bad luck. You're just different, and different doesn't mean wrong. You really think so? I know so. Come on. Let's get those cuts cleaned and see about getting you something to eat. Island brought Issa back to the castle, expecting to have to convince Lorimier to let him stay temporarily. But when he explained the situation, the vampire's response surprised him. He can stay, Lorimier said immediately, kneeling down to examine Issa's injuries with gentle hands. Shadow children are rare and often misunderstood. It would be a crime to let him suffer for something he had no control over. Really? Issa looked between them with hope beginning to replace the fear in his eyes. I can stay here? If you want to, Island said. We can't offer you a traditional family, but we can offer you safety and care and people who won't hurt you for being different. That night, as they settled Issa into a room near theirs, Lorimier pulled Island aside. Are you certain about this? He asked quietly. Caring for a child is a significant responsibility. I'm certain, Island said without hesitation. Lorimier, I know what it's like to be rejected for things you can't help. I won't let that happen to him if I can prevent it. And what if his presence here attracts attention? Shadow creatures have enemies, and not all of them will be impressed by our good intentions. Then we'll protect him, Island said simply. All of us together. Lorimier studied his face for a long moment, then smiled. You continue to surprise me, my heart. Yes, we'll protect him. All of us together. Chapter 8, Building a Family. Issa brought light into their lives in ways Island hadn't expected. His initial fear gradually gave way to curiosity, and then to genuine joy as he realized that they truly meant to keep him safe. He was incredibly intelligent, absorbing knowledge like a sponge and asking questions that kept both Lorimier and Island on their toes. Why do people fear shadow creatures? He asked one evening as the three of them sat by the fire, Lorimier reading aloud from a book of fairy tales. Because they don't understand them, Lorimier explained patiently. Shadow creatures have abilities that seem strange to those who live entirely in the light. Some people fear anything they don't understand. But you're not afraid of me. No, we're not, Island said, pulling him closer against his side. We think your abilities are interesting, not frightening. Can you show us? Lorimier asked gently. Only if you want to, of course. Issa looked between them uncertainly, then seemed to make up his mind. He held up his hand, and slowly shadows began to gather around his fingers like living smoke. With careful concentration, he shaped them into small figures, a wolf, a bird, a flower, each one perfectly detailed despite being made of nothing but darkness. That's incredible, Island breathed, watching the shadow wolf pad across Issa's palm. You're an artist, Issa. You think so? His face lit up with pride. The other families said it was creepy. The other families were idiots, Lorimier said firmly. Beauty comes in many forms, and yours is unique and wonderful. Over the following months, they settled into life as an unlikely family. Lorimier continued his work as a keeper of knowledge and dealer in artifacts. Island assisted with translations and research, and Issa served as their apprentice and, more importantly, the heart of their strange household. But their peaceful existence was shattered one autumn morning when strangers appeared at their door. Chapter 9. Confronting the Past. Island sensed them before they knocked, the familiar pack scent of home mixed with anger and suspicion. Through his gift, he could hear their emotions clearly. Disgust, fear, righteous indignation, and underneath it all, a familiar presence that made his chest tighten with old pain. Pack wolves, he told Lorimier and Issa as they gathered in the main hall. At least 6 of them, possibly more. They're not here for a friendly visit. Can you tell what they want? Lorimier asked, his demeanor shifting into something more dangerous. Me, I think. They're angry about something they blame on me. I should probably talk to them. We talk to them, Lorimier corrected firmly. You're not facing your former pack alone. When they opened the door, Island found himself face to face with members of his old pack, led by someone he had hoped never to see again. Kyrus stood at the front of the group, looking every inch the proud alpha, his winterstorm eyes hard with condemnation. Island, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Or do you still use that name, despite bringing shame to it? I use the name I was born with, Island replied, proud that his voice remained steady. What do you want, Kyrus? We want answers. The borderlands have been experiencing magical disturbances for months. Twisted creatures, corrupted plants, reality itself seeming to bend in unnatural ways. The trail leads here, to this castle, to your new associates. His gaze shifted to Lorimier, and Island saw recognition flicker in his eyes. He knew what Lorimier was, and he didn't like it. You live with vampires now, one of the other pack members spat. You've betrayed everything our people stand for. I live with someone who treats me with respect and kindness, Island replied. Something I never received from the pack. Respect. Kyrus laughed harshly. What respect does a vampire show its pet? You're nothing but a plaything to him, a curiosity to be used until he grows bored. The insult to both him and Lorimier made anger flare in Island's chest. But before he could respond, Lorimier stepped forward. The temperature around them seemed to rise several degrees, and Island caught a glimpse of flames flickering in his ruby eyes. You will not speak to him that way, Lorimier said, his voice carrying undertones of power that made even the Alpha Pack members shift nervously. Island is my chosen mate, my partner in all things, and he deserves respect from anyone who enters my domain. Chosen mate. Kyrus's expression twisted with something that might have been jealousy. You mean claimed property. Vampires don't form bonds. They take what they want and discard it when they're finished. You seem to be confusing vampires with werewolf alphas, Lorimier replied coolly. He chose me and I chose him in return. Neither of us was coerced. Neither of us was desperate. And neither of us settled for less than we deserved. The barb hit its mark. Kyrus's face darkened with rage, and several of the pack members behind him growled low in their throats. You've corrupted him, Kyrus snarled. Turned him against his own kind with your dark magic. I didn't turn him against anything, Lorimier said. Your pack managed that all on their own when they cast out one of their most valuable members for the crime of being rejected by a coward. How dare you dash? How dare I what? Tell the truth. Lorimir's power was becoming more visible now, flames wreathing his hands as his calm facade began to crack. You rejected your fated mate, publicly humiliated him in front of his entire community, and then allowed that community to exile him for your failure. And now you have the audacity to come here and suggest that he's the one who chose betrayal. The confrontation might have escalated into violence, but Issa chose that moment to appear in the doorway behind them. The pack members reacted to his presence with visible alarm. Shadow creatures were the stuff of nightmares to most werewolves. Island. Issa's voice was small and frightened. Are these the bad people who hurt you before? Not all of them, Island said gently, kneeling down to his level. Some of them, yes, but don't worry. They're not going to hurt any of us. The child is shadow-touched. One of the pack members whispered, and Island heard the fear in his voice. The corruption is spreading. First the Omega consorting with vampires. Now they're harboring monsters. He's not a monster, Island said, standing and placing a protective hand on Issa's shoulder. He's a little boy who needed a home and people who would care for him. We gave him both. This ends now, Kyrus declared, his alpha authority making his voice carry across the clearing. You will return with us to face judgment for the magical contamination you've caused. The vampire will be banished from Packlands, and the shadow creature will be dealt with according to ancient law. Ancient law? Island felt ice form in his veins. You mean you want to kill him? Shadow creatures are abominations that corrupt everything they touch. It would be a mercy. The protective rage that swept through Island was unlike anything he had ever experienced. This sweet, intelligent child who had brought so much joy into their lives. They wanted to murder him simply for existing. "No," Island said, and his voice carried power he didn't know he possessed. "You will not touch him. You will not threaten him. And you will leave our home immediately." "Your home?" Kairos stepped closer, trying to use his size and alpha presence to intimidate him. "You have no home, Omega. You were cast out, rejected, abandoned. You're nothing but a stray that a vampire decided to keep as a pet." "I am more than I ever was when I lived among the pack," Island replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I have work that matters, love that fulfills me, and a family that shows me freely what they mean to me. What do you have, Kairos? A pack that fears you more than they respect you? A leadership built on intimidation rather than inspiration? A life so empty that you have to travel for days just to hurt someone who never wronged you?" Through his gift, Island could hear Kairos's emotions clearly now: rage, yes, but also pain and regret and a loneliness that matched what he had felt during his own exile. Kairos had made his choice at the bonding ceremony, but it hadn't brought him the satisfaction he had expected. "I made the right choice," Kairos said, but there was doubt in his voice. "The pack needs strong leadership." "The pack needs wise leadership," Island corrected. "Strength without wisdom is just brutality. And brutality is what you're proposing now, the murder of a child whose only crime is being different." "It's not murder, it's protection." "Whose protection? The pack is miles away from here. Issa has never set foot on pack lands, has never threatened anyone, has never done anything but try to survive in a world that hates him for circumstances beyond his control." Island stepped forward, no longer the timid Omega who had been broken by rejection. "You want to kill him because his existence makes you uncomfortable. That's not protection. That's cowardice." The words hit Kairos like physical blows, and Island saw him flinch. Around them, the other pack members were shifting nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the confrontation was taking. "The magical disturbances - one of them began." "Have nothing to do with us," Lorimier interrupted. "I've been monitoring the magical climate of this region for months. The disturbances you're experiencing are coming from the northern mountains, not from this castle. There's an old nexus point there that's becoming unstable. If you want to solve your problem, that's where you need to look." "You're lying." "I'm a vampire who has made the study of magic his life's work," Lorimier replied dryly. "You're a werewolf who probably doesn't know the difference between active magic and residual traces. Which of us do you think is more qualified to make this assessment?" The truth of his words was obvious to everyone present, but Kairos wasn't ready to back down. His pride and his prejudices were too deeply entrenched. "Even if that's true," he said, "it doesn't change what you are, what all of you are. Unnatural, wrong, a corruption that needs to be cleansed." "If we're so unnatural," Island asked quietly, "then why are we happy? Why do we care for each other, protect each other, love each other? Why does our home feel more like a family than your pack ever did?" The question caught Kairos off guard. Through his gift, Island felt his confusion, his inability to reconcile his prejudices with the evidence in front of him. They weren't the monsters he had expected to find. They were just people who had found each other and chosen to build something beautiful together. "Because vampires are skilled at deception," he said finally, but the conviction was gone from his voice. "Is that what you see when you look at us?" Island asked. "Deception? Or do you see what you lost when you made your choice at the bonding ceremony?" "I lost nothing," Kairos snapped. "I made the right choice for my pack." "Did you? Or did you make the choice that felt safer? The choice that didn't require you to be vulnerable, to open your heart, to risk being hurt?" Island studied his face, seeing the pain he was trying so hard to hide. "I know what it feels like to be afraid, Kairos, but courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. And you think running away to live with vampires was courageous? I think building a new life from nothing was courageous. I think opening my heart to love again after being rejected was courageous. I think protecting a child who has no one else was courageous. Island glanced back at Loromir and Issa, drawing strength from their presence. But most of all, I think choosing love over hate, acceptance over prejudice, and hope over despair was courageous. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Island could feel the conflict raging within Kairos, his alpha training warring with his personal desires, his prejudices battling against the evidence of his own eyes. "This isn't over," he said finally, but the threat sounded hollow. "The pack will not tolerate this corruption on our borders." "Then the pack will have to learn tolerance," Loromir said firmly. "Because we're not going anywhere. This is our home, and we will defend it against anyone who threatens our family." "Family?" Kairos's voice was bitter. "You call this aberration a family?" "Yes," Island said simply, "because that's what it is. Not bound by blood or born from traditional bonds, but chosen freely and maintained through love and mutual respect. It's not the family I expected to have, but it's the one I choose every day." As if to emphasize his words, Issa stepped forward and took Island's hand, his small fingers interlacing with his. The gesture was simple but powerful, a child choosing his protector, demonstrating the bonds that held their unusual household together. "We choose each other," Issa said quietly, his young voice carrying surprising strength. "Every day we choose to be a family. Isn't that what love is supposed to be?" The innocence and wisdom in his words seemed to pierce through even Kairos's defenses. For a moment, his harsh expression softened, and Island caught a glimpse of the man he might have been if fear and pride hadn't ruled his choices. But the moment passed quickly as Kairos reasserted his alpha persona. "You have 1 week," he said. 1 week to leave this territory and take your family with you. If you're still here after that, we'll consider you a hostile threat and act accordingly." "We're not leaving," Island said calmly. "This is our home. We've built a life here, and we're not abandoning it because of threats from people who have no authority over us." "Then you've chosen your fate." Kairos turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Island. I had thought perhaps there was still time to salvage something from the bond we once shared. But I can see now that the corruption runs too deep." "There never was a bond between us," Island replied. "You made sure of that. What you're mourning isn't what we had. It's what you threw away." After the pack left, the 3 of them stood together in the doorway, watching them disappear into the forest. Island felt drained by the confrontation but also strangely liberated. He had faced his past and stood up to it, had defended the life he had chosen without apology or compromise. Chapter 10. Preparing for war. "Are they really going to come back and hurt us?" Issa asked, his voice smaller than usual. "They might try," Loromir said honestly. "But if they do, we'll be ready for them." "How can we be ready for a whole pack?" Island asked. "There are only 3 of us." "3 of us with very particular skills," Loromir corrected. "You can hear their intentions before they act on them. I have magic powerful enough to level mountains if necessary. And Issa has abilities they don't understand and can't predict." "You really think we can defend ourselves?" "I think we can do more than that," Loromir said, his ruby eyes glowing with fierce determination. "I think we can show them that different doesn't mean wrong, that chosen families can be just as strong as blood families, and that love is more powerful than hate. And if we can't convince them, then we protect what matters most to us," he said simply. "By any means necessary." The week that followed was tense but productive. Loromir began teaching both Issa and Island defensive magic skills that could help them protect themselves and each other if violence became unavoidable. Island worked on expanding his gift, learning to project emotions as well as read them, while Issa practiced controlling his shadow abilities with increasing sophistication. But more than preparing for conflict, they used the time to strengthen the bonds between them. They talked about what their family meant to each of them, what they were willing to sacrifice to protect it, and what kind of future they wanted to build together. "I've never had a real family before," Issa told them one evening as they sat together by the fire. "Not one that wanted me around. I thought there was something wrong with me." "There's nothing wrong with you," Island assured him. "You're exactly who you're supposed to be." Even if I'm different? Especially because you're different, Lorimier said. Difference is what makes life interesting. Conformity is overrated. Is that why you chose Island? Issa asked with the directness that only children possess. Because he's different? Lorimier looked at Island, his expression soft with affection. I chose Island because he's kind and intelligent and brave. Because he sees beauty where others see only strangeness. Because he makes me want to be better than I am. He reached over and took Island's hand. And yes, because he's different from anyone I've ever known. And you chose him too, right, Island? Even though people said it was wrong. I chose him because he makes me feel valued and loved and whole, Island said. Because he never asked me to be someone I'm not. Because he accepted all of me. The gifts, the scars, the fears, everything. That's what real love is supposed to be like, Issa said with the wisdom of someone far older than his years. Accepting all the pieces, even the weird ones. Chapter 11. The Return. The pack returned on the 8th day, just as dawn was breaking over the forest. But this time they didn't come alone. Island sensed them long before they became visible dozens of wolves. Far more than had come the first time. Through his gift, he could hear their emotions. Determination, fear, anger, and underneath it all, the kind of righteous certainty that made people capable of terrible things. They've brought the entire pack, he told Lorimier and Issa as they prepared for the confrontation. This isn't a negotiation anymore. They're here for war. Then war is what they'll get, Lorimier said grimly. His usual calm demeanor had been replaced by something far more dangerous, and flames danced around his fingers as he spoke. I won't let them hurt our family. When the pack emerged from the treeline, Island was stunned by their numbers. Nearly 50 wolves in human form, armed with traditional weapons and arranged in fighting formation. At their head walked Kairos, his face set in lines of grim determination. You were given a chance to leave peacefully, he called out as they approached the castle. You chose to stay. Now you face the consequences. The consequences of what? Island called back. Of finding happiness? Of building a family? Of refusing to be ashamed of who we are? The consequences of corruption, another voice answered. Island recognized him as one of the pack's spiritual leaders, an elder who had always been suspicious of anything that didn't fit into traditional categories. You consort with vampires, harbor shadow creatures, and practice unnatural magic. Your very existence is an affront to the natural order. What's unnatural about love? Issa asked, stepping forward with more courage than any child should have to show. What's wrong with taking care of each other? You are an abomination, the elder said harshly. Shadow creatures are born from the union of light and darkness, order and chaos. You represent everything that should not be. He represents hope, Island said firmly. He represents the possibility that different kinds of beings can coexist peacefully. He represents love transcending boundaries. Enough words, Kairos interrupted. You've had your chance to see reason. Stand aside, vampire, and let us cleanse this corruption. No. Lorimir's voice carried such power that several of the pack members actually took steps backward. You will not touch him. You will not touch either of them. They are under my protection, and I will destroy anyone who threatens them. You're outnumbered 50-1, Kairos pointed out. Powerful or not, you can't fight all of us. Perhaps not, Lorimir agreed. But I can make sure that anyone who survives will remember the cost of threatening my family. Chapter 12, The Battle. The battle that followed was unlike anything Island had ever witnessed. Lorimir's magic was devastating flames that could melt steel, barriers that could deflect the strongest attacks, illusions that turned the pack's numbers against them. But he was vastly outnumbered, and even his considerable power had limits. Island did what he could to help, using his gift to anticipate attacks and warn Lorimir of threats he couldn't see. Issa contributed too, using his shadow abilities to confuse and disorient their attackers. But they were still just 3 against 50, and gradually, inevitably, they began to be overwhelmed. It was when one of the pack members broke through their defenses and lunged toward Issa with a silver blade that something inside Island snapped. The protective rage that had been building throughout the fight suddenly exploded outward, and he felt power flow through him like nothing he had ever experienced. His gift, which had always been passive, suddenly became active. Instead of just hearing emotions, he began projecting them waves of fear, confusion, and despair that struck the attacking wolves like physical blows. Several of them dropped their weapons and fled. Others fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the sudden onslaught of foreign emotions. "Stop," Island commanded, and his voice carried power that made even Kairos pause mid-attack. "This ends now." "Island?" Lorimir looked at him with amazement. "How are you doing this?" "I don't know," Island admitted, "but I can feel all of them, their fears, their doubts, their secret shames, and I can make them feel what I felt, what we've all felt." He turned his attention to the pack, projecting the emotions he had experienced during his exile. The loneliness, the rejection, the despair of being cast out by those who should have cared for him. One by one, the wolves began to lower their weapons as they experienced firsthand what their actions had caused. "This is what you did to me," Island said, his voice carrying to every member of the pack. "This is what your prejudice and fear created. This is the pain you caused because you couldn't accept someone who was different." But he didn't stop there. He also projected the joy he had found with Lorimir and Issa, the warmth of acceptance, the security of unconditional love, the happiness of being valued for who he truly was. He let them feel what it was like to be part of a family that chose each other daily, that supported each other through difficulties, that celebrated each other's differences instead of fearing them. "And this is what you could have," he continued. "This is what love looks like when it's not constrained by tradition or prejudice. This is what family feels like when it's built on acceptance rather than conformity." The effect on the pack was profound. Many of them were weeping openly, overwhelmed by the intensity of the emotions Island was sharing. Others looked around with new understanding, seeing their companions not as part of a unified force, but as individuals with their own fears and desires. But Kairos, whether through alpha stubbornness or genuine resistance to Island's power, remained standing. "Enough," he snarled, raising his weapon. "I won't be swayed by vampire magic and Omega manipulation." "This isn't magic," Island said sadly. "This is truth. This is what you threw away when you rejected our bond. This is what you've been missing all these years." "I chose strength over weakness," Kairos insisted. "I chose the good of the pack over personal desire." "You chose fear over love," Island corrected. "And fear has made you into something your pack doesn't even recognize anymore." To prove his point, he projected Kairos's emotions outward, letting the other pack members feel what was really driving their alpha. Not noble dedication to duty, but terror of vulnerability, fear of being seen as weak, and a loneliness so profound it was like a physical wound. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Several pack members stepped away from Kairos, their expressions shifting from loyalty to pity. Others began to question out loud whether following him into this fight had been the right choice. "You see," Island said gently, "he's not the strong leader you think he is. He's a frightened man who has spent so long hiding his fears that he's forgotten how to be anything else." "Stop," Kairos whispered, and for the first time since Island had known him, his voice broke. "Please, just stop." Island could have continued. He could have destroyed Kairos completely, laid bare every secret shame and hidden weakness until he was broken beyond repair. But as he looked at him, really looked at him, he saw not the alpha who had rejected him, but a man who had been trapped by his own fears for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be free. "I forgive you," Island said quietly, and he meant it. "I forgive you for the rejection, for the pain, for trying to destroy the happiness I found after you threw me away. But I won't let you hurt my family." The power he had been wielding gradually subsided, leaving him exhausted but strangely at peace. Around them, the members of the pack were picking themselves up, looking around with the confused expressions of people waking from a shared dream. "The corruption they spoke of," one of them said slowly. "I don't see it. I see I see love. Real love, freely given and freely received. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe different doesn't always mean dangerous, another added. Kairos looked around at his pack, his followers who were now questioning everything he had taught them, and Island saw something break inside him. Not his spirit, but the rigid control that had been strangling his heart for so long. I was wrong, he said, his voice barely audible. About all of it. About you, about what strength really means, about what the pack needs. He looked directly at Island. I was a coward, and I made you pay for my cowardice. I hurt you because I was too scared to admit that I loved you. I led my pack here to hurt your family because I was too proud to admit that I had made a mistake. He dropped his weapon and fell to his knees. I have no right to ask, but can you ever forgive me? Looking down at him, this man who had once seemed so powerful and intimidating, Island felt the last of his anger fade away. Kairos wasn't his enemy anymore. He was just someone who had been trapped by his own limitations until they had nearly destroyed everything good in his life. I already have, Island said. But Kairos, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending that what happened didn't matter. And it doesn't mean I'm coming back. I know, Kairos said. I wouldn't ask that of you. You found something here that I could never give you. Something I was too broken to even understand. He looked over at Loromir and Issa. They're your real family now. Yes, they are. Kairos nodded slowly, then stood and turned to address his pack. We're leaving, he announced. There's no corruption here. No threat to our lands or our people. There's just a family trying to live in peace, and we have no right to disturb that. But Alpha, one of the younger pack members protested. The elders said dash. The elders were wrong, Kairos said firmly. And so was I. We came here looking for monsters and found only love. That should tell us something about our own hearts. As the pack began to disperse, preparing to return to their own territory, Kairos approached Island one last time. I want you to know, he said quietly, that seeing you happy, it means everything to me. I destroyed our bond because I thought it would make me stronger, but all it did was make me empty. You deserve the love you found here. You deserve love too, Island told him. Real love, with someone who sees all of you and chooses you anyway. But you'll never find it until you stop being afraid of your own heart. Maybe someday, Kairos said with a sad smile. But for now, I need to learn how to be the kind of leader my pack actually needs, not the kind I thought they wanted. Chapter 13, New Beginnings. After the pack was gone, the three of them stood together in the clearing around their castle, processing what had just happened. The confrontation that they had feared would destroy them had instead revealed strengths they didn't know they possessed and confirmed the depth of the bonds between them. That was incredible, Issa said, his eyes shining with admiration. Island, I didn't know you could do that with your gift. Neither did I, Island admitted. I think it was something that only became possible because I had something worth protecting. The power of love, Loromir said, wrapping his arms around both Issa and Island. It's the oldest magic in existence, and often the strongest. Are they really gone for good? Issa asked. Or will they change their minds and come back? I don't think they'll be back, Island said. But even if they are, we'll be ready. We're stronger together than any of us are alone. Speaking of being together, Loromir said, his tone becoming more formal, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with both of you. Issa and Island looked at him curiously. Island and I have been bonded in all but the most official sense, he continued. We love each other. We've committed to building a life together, and we've sworn to protect and care for each other. But there's never been a formal ceremony, a public declaration of our choice. Island's heart began to race as he realized where Loromir was going with this. I know that vampire bonding customs are different from werewolf traditions, he said, taking Island's hands in his. But I want everyone to know that what we have is real and permanent. I want to make it official. Are you asking me to marry you? Island asked, hardly daring to believe it. I'm asking you to be my partner in every sense of the word, Loromir said. To bind our lives together formally and completely. To make the family we've created official and recognized. What about me? Issa asked, and Island could hear the worry in his voice. Would I still belong here? You would be our son, Lorimir said firmly. Not by blood, but by choice. If you want that. I want that more than anything, Issa whispered, tears of joy streaming down his face. Then yes, Island said, his own eyes filling with tears. Yes, I want to marry you. I want to make this official. I want the whole world to know that we chose each other. Chapter 14, The Wedding. The ceremony they planned was unlike anything that had ever been performed before. It combined elements from vampire bonding traditions, werewolf pack customs, and rituals from Issa's shadow heritage, creating something entirely unique to their family. They held it at the autumn equinox, when day and night were perfectly balanced, a symbol of the harmony they had found between different worlds and different kinds of love. The ceremony took place in the clearing around their castle, decorated with flowers and candles and symbols from all their various traditions. There were no guests in the traditional sense. They had no family or friends to invite, no community that fully accepted all of them. But the forest itself seemed to approve of their union. Birds gathered in the trees to witness their vows, and even some of the forest's more magical residents appeared at the edges of the clearing, drawn by the power of the emotions they were sharing. I choose you, Island said to Lorimir as they stood together beneath the stars. Not because fate decreed it, but because you showed me what love really looks like. You gave me a home when I had none, purpose when I felt worthless, and a family when I thought I would always be alone. I choose you, Lorimir replied, because you brought light into a life that had grown dark with loneliness, because you showed me that strength comes in many forms, and the gentlest heart can be the bravest of all. They exchanged rings forged from metals that had been touched by both fire and starlight, symbols of the different worlds they came from and the new world they were creating together. Then they turned to Issa, who was practically vibrating with excitement. And we choose you, they said together, as our son, our family, our heart. We promise to love you, protect you, and support you as you grow into whoever you're meant to become. I choose both of you too, Issa said solemnly, as my fathers, my family, my home. I promise to love you and help you and make our family proud. The moment the final vows were spoken, something shifted in the air around them. It wasn't magic exactly, but it was power of a different kind, the power of commitment freely given, of love consciously chosen, of family deliberately created. It's done, Lorimir said softly. We're officially a family now. We were always a family, Island corrected. Now we just have the paperwork to prove it. Chapter 15. Growing Love. That night, as they celebrated their new status with a feast prepared from Issa's favorite foods and Lorimir's most prized wines, Island reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. A year ago, he had been a broken Omega with no home, no hope, and no future. Now he was a married man with a family he adored and work that fulfilled him. Any regrets? Lorimir asked as they sat together, watching Issa play with his shadow creatures, their forms dancing in the firelight. Only that it took us so long to make it official, Island said. Only that I waited so long to find you, Lorimir replied. But perhaps that's the point. Perhaps we both needed to become who we were meant to be before we could recognize each other. Do you think Issa feels the same way about belonging here? As if summoned by their conversation, Issa looked up from his play and smiled at them with pure joy. I can hear you talking about me, he said with the uncanny perception that children sometimes possess. And yes, I feel like I belong here. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Good, Lorimir said firmly, because you are exactly where you're supposed to be. All of us are. Looking around at their strange, wonderful family, a rejected Omega, an ancient vampire, and a shadow child, Island had to agree. They weren't what anyone would have expected, weren't what tradition would have prescribed, but they were exactly what each of them needed. They were home. Chapter 16, New Challenges. The months following their official bonding ceremony brought a peace Island had never known was possible. Their days settled into comfortable rhythms, mornings spent working on translations and research, Afternoons exploring the forest with Issa, evenings gathered around the fire sharing stories and dreams. The castle had become more than just a dwelling. It was a sanctuary where three damaged souls had found healing and wholeness together. But their tranquil existence was about to face a new challenge, one that would test the strength of their chosen family in ways they couldn't have anticipated. It began with dreams. At first, Island thought they were simply nightmares brought on by the stress of recent events. He would wake in the middle of the night, his heart racing, fragments of disturbing visions clinging to his consciousness like shadows. Dark figures moving through mist, ancient voices speaking in languages he couldn't understand, a sense of something vast and malevolent stirring in the depths of the world. Just dreams, he told himself, and initially Lorimir agreed. But as the visions grew more frequent and more vivid, they both began to suspect they might be something more. "Describe them again," Lorimir said one morning after Island had awakened from a particularly intense episode. They were sitting in his study, surrounded by books on prophecy and divination, searching for answers. "There's always water," Island said, trying to piece together the fragmented images. "Deep, dark water that reflects things that aren't there. And voices calling from beneath the surface, speaking words that sound almost familiar but not quite." "What do the voices say?" "Something about awakening, about the time of choosing, about old debts coming due." Island rubbed his temples, feeling the phantom ache of the dream headache that always followed these visions. "And there's always a sense of urgency, like something terrible will happen if I don't understand what they're trying to tell me." Lorimir was quiet for a long moment, his ruby eyes distant with thought. "Island," he said finally, "I think your gift may be evolving again. The confrontation with your pack awakened abilities you didn't know you possessed. It's possible that your connection to the emotional realm has opened other channels of perception as well." "You mean the dreams might be prophetic?" "I mean the dreams might be a form of communication. There are entities in this world that exist primarily in the realm of emotion and thought. If your gift has expanded enough, you might be receiving messages from them." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Messages about what? That's what we need to find out. Their research into the nature of Island's visions led them deep into Lorimir's collection of ancient texts. They discovered references to beings called the Depth Speakers, entities that existed in the spaces between waking and sleeping, between thought and reality. According to the old writings, they only made contact with mortals during times of great change, when the balance of the world was shifting in ways that could affect all realms of existence. The last recorded contact with the Depth Speakers was over 300 years ago, Lorimir explained as they pored over a particularly ancient tome, just before the Great War between the Shadow Realms and the Elemental Courts. They warned of the coming conflict and helped certain individuals prepare for the chaos that followed. "And you think they're trying to warn us about something similar?" "I think they're trying to warn us about something worse." As if summoned by their discussion, Issa appeared in the doorway of the study. But something was wrong with his usual cheerful demeanor. His young face was pale and drawn, and his shadow abilities seemed to be fluctuating without his conscious control, wisps of darkness swirling around him like anxious spirits. "Issa," Island stood immediately, his parental instincts overriding his scholarly concerns. "What's wrong?" "I've been having dreams too," he said quietly. "Dreams about the dark water. But in mine, I can understand what the voices are saying." Lorimir and Island exchanged alarmed glances. If Issa was receiving the same visions, then whatever the Depth Speakers were trying to communicate was definitely connected to their family specifically. "What do they say?" Lorimir asked gently. Issa came further into the room, his small hands clenched into fists at his sides. "They say the barriers are weakening. The walls between the realms are starting to crack, and things that were locked away long ago are beginning to wake up. They say there's going to be a war and that people like us, people who exist between worlds, are going to be the key to stopping it." "People like us?" Island prompted. "People who don't fit into just one category. You, with your gift that bridges emotion and prophecy. Lorimir, with his vampire heritage and his connection to multiple realms. Me, with my shadow nature that exists between light and darkness." His young voice carried a weight that no child should have to bear. They say we're going to have to choose sides, and that the choice we make will determine the fate of all the realms. The magnitude of what Issa was describing hit Island like a physical blow. They had just found peace, had just established their family and their place in the world. The idea that they might be called upon to fight in some cosmic conflict was almost too much to process. Did they say when this war would begin? Lorimier asked, his practical mind already working on the logistics of the situation. Soon, Issa said. They showed me images of the signs to watch for strange weather patterns, animals fleeing from certain areas, magic behaving unpredictably. And they said the first battles would be fought in places where the barriers between realms are already thin. Places like the Forest of the Forgotten, Island realized with growing dread. Places like here, Lorimier confirmed grimly. Chapter 17. Preparing for the Unknown. Over the following weeks, they threw themselves into preparation with the intensity of scholars cramming for the most important examination of their lives. Lorimier pulled out texts he hadn't consulted in decades, reaching out to contacts across multiple realms to gather information about the growing instability. Island worked on expanding his prophetic abilities, learning to interpret the visions more clearly and to communicate with the depth speakers more directly. Issa practiced controlling his shadow powers, discovering that his unique heritage gave him access to abilities that even experienced shadow workers couldn't match. But it was the arrival of an unexpected visitor that truly brought home the reality of what they were facing. Island was working in the garden one afternoon, tending to the herbs they used for both cooking and magical purposes, when he felt a familiar presence approaching the castle. But this time, the emotional signature was different, less aggressive, more desperate, tinged with exhaustion and fear. Kairos emerged from the forest alone, his usual proud bearing replaced by something that looked almost like defeat. His